Today we would say that Elijah was suffering from stress or burnout, emotional overload, had pushed himself too far. And the people who are particularly prone to stress and burnout are high achievers, people who are working with other people. You have a tremendous case study of the effects of burnout in the life and experience of Moses. Moses loved his people. He was a great leader. He was an outstanding organizer and administrator. He loved his people. And in Exodus chapter 18, we're given an insight into a typical day in Moses' life. Exodus chapter 18 and verses 13 to 16. Exodus 18 and beginning at verse 13. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws." That's what Moses was exposed to day after day after day. Complaints, disputes, disagreements. Now, I understand that it's a policy in the major department stores to rotate people who work in the customer services section. Because it's been proven that if you are listening to complaints day after day after day, eventually it has an impact on you. And here was Moses. He was God's man, he was doing God's work, but he was being subjected to this day after day. And eventually it took its toll. We see the impact it had on him in Numbers chapter 11. Turn with me to Numbers chapter 11, beginning in verse 10. The children of Israel were complaining. They wanted variety in their diet. And so they brought their complaint to Moses. And in Numbers chapter 11, we have his reaction. Numbers 11 and verse 10. Moses heard the people of every family wailing, each at the entrance to his tent. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised an oath to their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, put me to death right now, if I have found favour in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." You see, here's a man that's going through burnout. Here is a man who is physically exhausted, who's emotionally spent. Here is a man who pushed himself to the limits. Here is a man who went too far, far too far, in terms of his physical boundaries. And it was affecting his relationships with the people, and his relationship with God. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats once said this: "Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart." In other words, if you and I are constantly giving and giving and giving and not taking care of ourselves, There will become a place when we will be burnt out, when we will be spiritually numb. And it will impact upon our relationships with each other and, most crucially, with God Himself. This is so important in the modern society in which we live. If you know someone who's a high achiever, who is working with people all the time, then that person requires support and encouragement and help. They need rest and space. And if you are such a person, if you're working in an environment where you are giving, where you are dealing with people's problems and issues, it is so important that you look after yourself. That you take time, that you create space, that there is a margin in your life where you can be refreshed and strengthened for the tasks that you carry out from day to day. Elijah did not provide for that. And so he came to a point where he was totally exhausted, physically and emotionally spent. So Elijah was tired, physically exhausted, emotionally spent. He failed to take into account the aftermath of success, the reality of anticlimax, the letdown factor. And this all combined to drag him down. He didn't think clearly. He lost his perspective. In that situation, if he had had perspective, he would have recognized the source of the threat. After all, God had taken care of 450 prophets of Baal. God could have taken care of one woman. But Elijah didn't see that. Elijah felt that he was alone, when in fact that was not the case. Elijah felt that he was a failure, when in actual fact he had won a glorious victory for God. But all Elijah could see were the problems and the difficulties and the challenges. He forgot the blessings. He forgot the many evidences of God's leading in his life. And as a result, he descended into the pit of self-pity. Have any of you ever been in the pit of self-pity? You know, sometimes it's a very nice place to be, to wallow about and think, oh, woe am I? No one appreciates me. But it's a bad place to stay in. It can only lead to disaster. It's not a good place to be in. And so here we have the prophet Elijah. We have this great spiritual giant laid low. And because of that, that was having an influence upon God's work in the northern kingdom of Israel. Because of Elijah's response to that situation, he failed to capitalize and build on and follow through the wonderful victory that had been accomplished at Mount Carmel. But thank God that the story does not end there. Because this is a story of God's goodness. This is a story of God's tender response to Elijah's situation. And I'd like to summarize God's response in 3 points.